Hey everybody, this is Tim Chavez from Faith Matters. We've been thinking and talking a lot recently about a phenomenon that sometimes happens and that we've occasionally felt ourselves, something you might call a spiritual whiplash. It can happen when we're really uplifted by something, maybe a book that we've read, an inspiring group of people that we've been around, or even a transcendental experience in nature. We're feeling fed and our cup is full, but then we come back down to earth. We're faced with the realities of the mundane and the imperfections and humanity of the people all around us, including ourselves. So, what are we supposed to do when this happens? Is it realistic to expect to stay in this spiritually uplifted state all the time? What about when even our church meetings don't feel like they're recharging our batteries, but instead are draining them? When we're feeling fed by something, how do we take that feeling with us to share in our everyday settings and communities, rather than resenting the contrast between them? How can we look at members of those communities as God might, rather than judging them for not meeting our standards, or even judging them for what we perceive as them judging us? So, to discuss these issues, which we know can be very real and very tricky, we brought back a trusted friend and mentor, Patrick Mason. Patrick is the Leonard Arrington Chair of Mormon History and Culture at Utah State University, and a frequent guest on the show and advisor to Faith Matters. He's spoken and written quite a bit on this topic, including in his book, Planted. He was an amazing conversation partner as we worked our way through some of these questions. We can't thank him enough for coming back on. And as a note, we referenced our recent Restore gathering several times in the conversation, including presentations that were given by Brian McLaren, Jared Halverson, and Jody Moore. We also reference a few faith development frameworks that you'll hear, including Brian's, which you can learn more about in his book, Faith After Doubt. And thanks to you, as always, for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did.
Patrick Mason, we're so happy to have you back again. Thanks so much for coming back on for another conversation.
Thanks, Aubrey. Always good to be here.
Always. Hey, so we've just had this incredible weekend at Restore, and it was just, I feel like I'm floating still. You know, I just feel like it filled my cup, but we wanted to have a conversation about something that I've heard a lot of feedback about, which is that some people have had this experience of a little bit of whiplash. Like they felt filled and they resonated with a lot of the messages, and then they like come back to reality. And that was not my experience. My experience was like I felt like my cup is overflowing, and I'm still, it's brought me a lot of peace. It brought me a lot of peace to take with me to church on Sunday. But we thought this would be a great conversation to just have with you, and especially because you sort of addressed this a little bit with Dawn in your Q&A at Restore, and Dawn was just incredible. Her questions were so good, and I loved everything that she asked you. But the very first question out of the gate was basically, this all sounds great, but this isn't the church that I go to.
Yeah.
And I know that I've heard you ask that question in so many different settings. And so we felt like this would be a great topic for an entire episode. So let's just start right there. You know, what do you say when somebody finishes a book, when somebody finishes Restoration, or Restoration especially, and the feeling is like, yeah, I would like to be a part of that church, but that is not my reality.
Yeah. No, I do hear that a lot. It's interesting that the people felt that way after the conference. I can see why that would be the case, and we can talk about that a little bit. But I think, you know, I'm okay with the fact that the reality doesn't always meet our ideals, right? That I think it's and no doubt the kind of vision that I laid out in Restoration, that the kind of vision that so many of the people at the conference laid out, all of that is aspirational. It's grounded in reality. It's grounded in real things, right? We can point to things where there are seeds, where there's some possibility there, and maybe it's not fully realized, but it's still there. And but you're right. The challenge is then how do you to slip back into just kind of the everyday world. That if I want to get like a little bit theological for a moment, this is the way that a lot of theologians talk about the kingdom of God in the New Testament. So sometimes Jesus says like, hey, the kingdom of God is right here. It's with you. You're the kingdom of God. Like, huzzah. Right. And then other times it's like, no, it's like on some way distant horizon. And so there's this sense of like, it's both already here and it's not yet arrived. And that's the tension that we have to live in as Christians. But it's the tension we live in, as Latter Day Saints too. I mean, we both realize there's like something special going on. There's something incredible about our community. There's something really great, but it's also not what it's meant to be yet. And I think when we lean too much into the we've arrived, then that leads to kind of passivity. All is well in Zion, like we don't have to do anything. That's a danger. But when we lean too much in the like, this isn't yet what it's supposed to be. This isn't yet what I aspire for it to be. Then then that becomes dangerous too. Because we're never satisfied. It's never good
Right.
enough. It's never. We're always going to be disappointed. So I think a lot of it is we just have to kind of create our own little sub communities, whether that be Faith Matters, right? I think Faith Matters has done a great job of creating community within the broader church, or what maybe it's at the dinner table with just a handful of friends in your community. But so in some ways, you've got to create the church that you want to be a part of, while also participating in a larger church as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Aubrey. Sorry.
Well, before we move on from that, I think, couldn't there be some danger too in creating a community, in creating your own little echo chamber that actually
Yeah.
sort of divides you from the broader community? Like I appreciate
Yep.
some breathing room. Like you need like these spaces of grace that Brian McLaren mentioned recently. And like that's been so beneficial for me. Like just somewhere where it feels like I can like relax a little bit and trust that people are, that I can trust the people I'm speaking with and that we can hold a little bit of space for each other, but in an effort to bring that back to our broader community, right? Like I
Yeah.
as soon as
Yeah.
it like sets you apart, then we're back to we have a problem again.
That's exactly right. And it's that, not every space can perform all those functions all at once. I mean, uh, yesterday I had lunch with a guy I'd never met before, but we met and we just like hit it off immediately. Like, and we were just simpatico and we were able to talk about things, including church related things in ways that I wouldn't talk about in elders quorum, right? In front of a big group. And I don't think that's hypocrisy. That's not being two-faced. It's just what you're talking about, being in spaces where you're comfortable having conversations that maybe necessarily aren't always appropriate for a larger and more diverse group. I always remember when I was teaching at Claremont, I had Laurel Thatcher Ulrich come to my class once, and this like a feminist icon. And this was not just a Mormon history students. I mean, it was all kinds of students, and so they all know her, as just this incredible feminist scholar. And but they also know that she was a Mormon, and she talked about this a little bit too. And one of the non-LDS students asked, I think very bravely, but they said, here you are, like you're this icon of feminism, like how in the world do you stay in this church, right? That you're a part of. And she just looked at them immediately, and she said, "It's my church too." Right? It's not just their church. The other people don't own the church. It's my church too. And so I want to create the church and be a part of the church that I'm going to help create. Now I love that sentiment. I think that's really important for everybody to kind of own their own membership and their own space within the church. But the flip side of that, the other side of the coin is it's not just your church, it's their church too. So I don't want it to be the Church of Patrick Mason. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it's Jesus Christ Church first and foremost, but then also all of the Latter-day Saints. I'm just one of them. So there's always, again, it's about tension. It's about paradox, both creating space for yourself, but also creating space for other people, and recognize that other people inhabit that space as well.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and came up a lot at Restore as well, is sort of like stages of faith development. One of our very favorite frameworks comes from Brian McLaren. He has a 4-stage framework that he calls simplicity, then complexity, then perplexity, then harmony or solidarity. And that's been a really useful framework for us, but it can be tempting to try to sort of just like find your people. I mean, especially once you start thinking in these terms and separate yourself from the others. In Planted, you say Latter-day Saints must find a way to not simply coexist, but to truly embrace diversity. When we think of diversity, we're often thinking of gender or racial or sexual orientation or whatever it is. But I'm curious, if we took that sentence from Planted and applied it to the context of of stages of faith, like how can we embrace diversity when it comes to we're all in different places in our faith journey?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I immediately think of Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ from First Corinthians 12, and everybody knows this, but where he really talks about how the body of Christ needs all the members, it needs all the gifts, and none of the members gets to say to the other, "I'm so important, and I don't need you." Right? Or I've progressed, I've evolved to a certain point, and so I've left you behind. I don't need you anymore. And the stages of faith models, and there's lots of them out there, but the ones that I like the best are the ones that recognize the goods that are inherent in each of the stages, both the goods and the limitations. And so in a community, recognizing that everybody's going to be at a different place because of their experience, their perspective, their worldview, just their own proclivities, that actually the community is better. The body of Christ is stronger when all the members are there, with all the people in all of their different stages. And I think that like it's really hard to do, right? Especially when you've kind of you've moved through, you've kind of passed through one stage, and you can remember what it was like, and now you're at a different place, and maybe you even are appreciative of the good things that you learned from that stage, but you're like, oh man, I'm so much happier now, I'm in a better place. It's just a very human thing to say, wouldn't it be better if everybody was like me? I mean, that is the ego. And but I think what Paul is really pushing back on there is like, no, it would not be better if everybody were like you. That would be a terrible body if it were all eyes or all ears or all hearts, no matter how important each of those parts are. And so it's really an act of humility to be able to say, I need not just I can coexist with other people in other stages, but I need them, and they act as checks on me, and and I might even have things to learn. One of the most important things for my own spirituality over the last few years has been a kind of intentional spiritual discipline of listening extra hard to the people who are different than me, and especially those that I'm inclined to disagree with.
Mhm.
And I already know who those people are. In general conference, when they stand up at the pulpit, I already know that I'm inclined to disagree with them, right?
Mhm.
Or they may not be my favorite. Especially, when certain ward members stand up, I already know that I'm inclined to disagree with them. Versus others, when my friends get up, it's like, ooh, I want to hear what great things they have to say that completely confirm my worldview and make me feel good about myself. But this is what Jesus says: if you only have love for your friends, like that's not great, and that's not good enough. And so I think there's a kind of spiritual discipline of actually leaning in extra hard, and it's paid dividends for me, certainly, to say, wow, this person sees the world differently than me. They may be in a different stage of faith than I am. So actually, what can I learn from them? At least it's been useful for me.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, Brian talked about, and this is at Restore, but he's talked about it elsewhere, not trying to create what he calls a stage 4 community, but a 4-stage community
Right.
in which all stages are not only welcome, but are welcoming of the other stages. But I want to ask, sort of really in a really practical way, is it possible to imagine, is it possible, I've never seen it done, at least the way I'm imagining it, where we're saying this is truly a 4-stage community, all are welcome, nobody's going to feel marginalized, nobody's going to feel like they don't quite fit the mold, everyone's going to be just really tolerant and really accepting of wherever they are. So I guess, A, is that possible? And B, is that really what we're looking for? Or am I missing the point if I'm looking to go to church and there's just a radical inclusivity and tolerance and acceptance?
because I think there's a way you could define Zion. Like I would imagine that like Zion is a stage 4 community. Like it's a community where everybody's in harmony. Like there's just solidarity because we're all at the same phase stage, and like there's just nobody's in perplexity and nobody's being rigid, and like I can imagine this world that feels very comfortable that I would like to call Zion. And so like what, isn't that the goal?
Yeah, well, I think there'd be a lot of people in, say, stage 1 or 2 who say, "Well, it's what Zion is actually everybody in my stage too," you know? And I think the hardest thing is, because the fact is that the people in, say, stage 1 or 2, depending on which model you're looking at, right? Uh, Oftentimes one of the difficulties for them is to appreciate what it might look like for somebody in a different stage, right? Is it stage 3 or 4 or whatever? And actually Jared Halverson, I think, did a nice job talking about this during his presentation at Restore, that
Yeah.
that especially when you're like kind of like two stages apart, it's really hard to see each other. When you're one stage apart, maybe, right? There's a kind of recognition there. When you're 2 or 3, again, depending on the numbers, it can be like the worldviews seem so incommensurate. And there's even, I think, one of the downsides of a kind of simplicity worldview is you actually, that there can be a temptation to wish that complexity didn't exist. When you're in Eden, it looks pretty great, and you don't want to leave. The outside world looks pretty scary and dangerous, um, and vice versa, right? Once you're kind of out and you realize the goods that come from that, you're like, oh man, I'd never want to go back there. And so this is the challenge. I mean, I I believe, Tim. I mean, I think a Zion community has to include everybody. It has to create space for everybody. Has to create space for people with real doubts and real questions, but who want to be there for whatever reason. It's got to. I'll never forget what one of my ward members back in California. I think I'd just given a planted about fireside and stuff, and she was great. She's just an amazing, amazing woman. We all know lots of people like this who are just incredible Christians who just they're very much on the simplicity side. And she said, like, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate what you're saying. I appreciate that you're trying to create space for all these people, but like, I'm not interested, right? Like, I have zero interest in going there with you. And, and I realized, like, in that moment, in that conversation, I was kind of like, you know what? I don't have much interest in pulling you into my space either, because you're doing just
Wow.
fine where you are. Like,
Yeah.
you are like where you are, and you're understanding the gospel is motivating such acts of Christian service and love for other people
Yeah.
better than I. And so, like, who am I to like pull you into some other place when frankly you're doing just fine? So I think our communities, it's so hard. It takes humility on our part, and then charity and empathy to see the good in other people. But yeah, we've got to create spaces where for people wherever they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as I've thought through this too, I've wondered if there is like a really specific purpose that each sort of stage is contributing to the organization generally, and I've wondered if sort of the role, and I'm just making this up, but like the role of sort of early stages, stage 1 and 2, is to create real sort of like boundaries that may be necessary to even have what can be called a cohesive community, and if the role of stage 3 is to sort of like push things forward to raise all of the most difficult
Yeah.
issues, and the role of the later stages may be to sort of just be at the edge of inside, sometimes pushing where necessary, and just maybe holding the tension of not always feeling super welcome, but sort of remaining regardless,
And
and
maybe
filling
being the
filling in the
bridge
cracks.
builders because they've been
Yeah.
Yeah,
in each of those spaces, so they can have a direct kind of sympathy for those people, and so
yeah.
create bridges between those others.
Yeah, totally. And one interesting thing that we've seen, I think, in Protestantism generally, is that there's been sort of a continuous schisming, right? Why is it better to all be showing up to the same church building on Sunday when we're so different?
Because then you get the church of eyes or the church of
Yeah,
ears or the church of
yeah,
livers, right? And that's not the vision. I mean, you talk to any Protestant, kind of serious Protestant who's really thoughtful about this, and they will acknowledge the scandal of Christianity is its division. That they know from reading the New Testament: one Lord, one faith, one baptism. The same thing that sent Joseph Smith into the grove, and this is the scandal that plagues all of Christianity, and it's most accentuated within Protestantism. And so we don't want to go down that route. I mean, I'm pretty Catholic friendly. Went to Notre Dame, cheered for Notre Dame against BYU. Uh, um, uh, and so,
No worries. We can edit that part out, Patrick.
no, leave that. That's the most important thing. That's my identity. I'm a stage 6 Notre Dame Latter-day Saint. So, but I think Roman Catholicism, over its 2,000 years of history, it's certainly not perfect, has a lot of issues. But one of the things it's figured out how to do is to create lots of communities for lots of people, depending on kind of their own proclivities, their own, how they relate with God, how they relate to other people, the things that they're passionate about. But to do that all in communion, literally, the thing that binds them all is the celebration of the Lord's Supper, of Mass, of their coming together. And so you can have Jesuits and Franciscans and all these different kinds of orders that they've created within the church, but all in communion together around the thing that matters most. So I think, we're young, we're small, we've prioritized unity, I think, in really special ways, but that can also be stifling. And so what might it look like to have voluntary communities of affiliation, right? Where people get together because they're like-minded. But then what the church provides is, especially the institutional church, that 2-hour block on Sunday, what that provides is a place where we all come together, regardless of whatever sub-communities we've created throughout the week.
Yeah.
And
There,
so, go ahead, Aubrey.
that idea was so powerful to me when I heard this idea of that maybe the goal is to have all 4 stages, and like we're all supposed to be there together. And I felt like both totally convicted and inspired, because I think that's a way that narcissism sort of slipped in, and I felt very proud when I could listen to someone and identify, like, oh, I recognize that you are describing simplicity, and like, even though I felt like that gave me more understanding and some compassion, I think there is a way where that actually really did kind of like feed this narcissism, that like I've moved beyond this stage, but I like, I can see that you're trying, and so I needed this new idea that, like, no, like, he is supposed to be here, and he belongs as much as I do. And I could hear Jody Moore's voice in my head saying, like, all this time I have been saying that this person, and actually I'll be very personal. Like, I had a very specific experience on Sunday, walking into church in the morning and seeing a leader who I've really struggled with for years, because of this feeling that I think he is very comfortably in simplicity, and it really bothers me. And I could hear Jody Moore's voice being like, oh my gosh, all this time I've been saying that he is the barrier to my feeling like I belong. And I've been sitting here like pushing him out, like in my own mind, just feeling so comfortable saying, you're wrong, and you're doing faith wrong, you're leading wrong, and you're the reason that I can't feel love. And I think that was really the real barrier. And I walked in and saw him and felt so much gratitude, that, like, thank you for being here and being our simplicity person, and helping this be a 4-stage community. Like, I want that, and it wouldn't be that without you, and and lots of people. But I've just never felt like real gratitude, and I felt like for the first time I actually could be open to learning something from him, instead of I think I would listen, but I was listening for cues to help me recognize his stage. And this felt like I could imagine sitting and listening and actually, like, being refined, like actually growing myself and genuinely learning, because it sort of broke down that, like, narcissistic belief that I know where he's going and where he should go and how he should do better.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think, there is this temptation of narcissism, of the ego, of a kind of smugness that can come at any point along the road. And I think maybe, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but maybe the burden and the opportunity for people who are in a stage 4, place would be to to create these bridges of understanding between
Mm,
the others who oftentimes can't even see each other or recognize each other, right?
yeah.
Um, and but the downside is that everybody then views you with some degree of suspicion, right? So if you're in this
Right.
place, the maybe the simplicity people think you're not fully on their team. But the people who are really going through perplexity, they were really going through struggles and doubts, they also view you with a little bit of suspicion too. And so it's the willingness to kind of absorb some of that and say, I recognize that, but I'm still going to do my best to like be here and create these bridges, create relationships where people can hear and understand and love each other. That maybe that's, I mean, that's it, but it's a hard thing to do because you are absorbing the suspicion of
Yeah.
a lot of other folks.
Yeah.
But I think even just having that articulated, like, could that be part of the mission of perplexity and harmony? That like you're always going to be kind of in this middle space where you're absorbing that tension. Because without words, then I think it just kind of you absorb it as pain. Like
Yep.
it just feels
Right.
hard. And so I think if you have words that, what if, like Tim, like you were saying, like what if part of the mission of perplexity and harmony is that like David Brooks, I love what David Brooks says about the edge of insight, that like you don't enjoy the loyalty of the like the approval and the loyalty of the insider or the outsider. And so you're just kind of in this like very uncomfortable space. But like maybe that means that that's exactly how it should be. And that's the gift of stage 3 and 4. And the gift of stage 1 and 2 is that they're going to keep creating those boundary markers and like creating the container to hold us all. And
Right.
I just have never recognized that as something that I benefit from too. I benefit from the fact that we have an identity. And probably if we started in this stage 4 harmony, like I'm not sure how that identity would have ever been forged.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may
And
not have been strong enough, right? I'm
Yeah.
thinking about Jared's presentation, where he mentioned being, I think, in a Sunday school class, and somebody had raised their hand, or the teacher had said something that was like totally like stage 1, right? And then he said he could like start to sense other people like raising their hands who were going to correct, and
Oh
he
my
was going to
gosh.
turn into
Yeah.
this conflict, and instead he kind of inserted himself and validated both what the teacher or that first comment had said, but also then recognized, anticipated what was going to be
Yeah.
said there, and in that moment did a kind of peace building.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I mean that's a skill set, and that is a gift that can be offered to the community that otherwise would polarize.
Yeah.
So we need some
Wow. Yeah.
we need people, who have their stakes in the ground and feel very strongly about where they are, but we need some glue. We need some horizontal connectors to keep this all together.
Yeah. And I think
Wow.
also that, I mean, there's the idea that maybe that it's supposed to be hard too. Not
Yeah.
that, not that we're always going to get, not that acceptance is always going to be a reality, or, an abundance of tolerance or whatever, but that when we go and we're sort of in tension ideologically, or in terms of where you're at in your faith journey, like it is going to be hard. And maybe that's the purpose. Like I think we have a biological sort of need or desire for everything to be easy and effortless, but I think there's a spiritual need for things to be challenging. I think my at least the way I imagine heavenly parents is that their project for us in this life is to grow. And as anyone that's ever participated in weight training knows, like the only way to grow is through significant amounts of tension, significant amounts of discomfort over a long period of time and consistently. And this goes back to Eugene England and why the church is as true as the gospel, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that church where we're meeting people that we don't agree with, that sometimes we don't like, that are so hard to love, that is what's causing the tension that actually allows us to grow over time.
Yeah, completely.
I want to bring up one. I think it's implanted where you say that you've never been in a bad ward, air quotes. Can you just
Uh-huh.
talk about that for somebody?
You're
Like
so
talk
lucky,
to somebody.
Patrick. I've been in so many bad wards.
Would you like to name them, Tim?
Yeah, exactly.
He's joking.
No, I'm setting you up to just knock this out of the park and use me as a bad example.
Well, I mean, yeah, partly I'm lucky, and I have heard, uh, like I have a lot of friends who just tell me horror stories about
Yeah.
some of the warts they've been in. I mean, the funny thing is that it's all oftentimes it's relative, right? That the friends of mine who experienced a particular ward as really hard, even to the point that they couldn't do it anymore. I'll bet if you polled other people in the ward, they'd say, "Oh, this is the best ward I've ever been in." Right? The people are so amazing, and so forth. So it's a ward of several hundred people oftentimes, and so you're gonna have really different experiences. Uh, and so yeah, I mean, so partly it's luck on my side, but it's also um, wards are partly what you make of them. And I know whenever I say something like that, it runs the risk of trivializing the experiences that some people are having that again are just really hard. Again, I've got really good friends here in Cache Valley who had um, uh, some really tough stuff in their ward, including with their kids, and they had to end up going to a different ward, and now they're much happier, and they are whole again spiritually. They can feel the spirit in church in the way that because of these interactions they just weren't able to in their previous ward. So I know that happens, um, but most of the time. I think there is a way that we can create space for ourselves. We can create space for others. We can recognize. I think part of what we've just been talking about can be a big part of it of recognizing the paradigm isn't to go to church with people who are like me. So that way I'm not disappointed or surprised when
Yeah.
somebody says something that I disagree with. Um, but you know, I think the great strength of Mormonism has been the way that it creates communities. And community is tough. Community is really hard. So again, sometimes it is oppressive and even abusive. But most of the time, most Latter-day Saint communities really are communities of care, where ordinary people are doing their absolute best at all of these different stages to create a place where people can experience God and serve each other. And so that's what I mean when I say I've never been in a bad ward because I see what's going on in that ward. Right, I see the amount of hours that people are spending in serving each other, right, and teaching my kids in primary. They may come home and I may disagree with something that they taught. Right, I mean, like right now, like we're dealing with like the primary program is coming up, or even just they've been singing Book of Mormon stories, and doing some of the hand signals that kind of the old fashioned Indian hand signals, and I don't love that, right? And so we're thinking about like, do we talk to anybody about it? Do we let it slide? I mean, so we all have to like navigate these kinds of things within community because it's personalities involved and people and what are the fights that you want to fight? Some things you're like, hey, I'm going to die on that hill. Other things you're like, maybe not. I
Mhm.
can let this one go. We all have to discern how to make this work. But I think wards are amazing places where that marshal the talents of a lot of sincere people just doing their best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
to be
think so
clear,
too.
just in my joke, I'm saying that I have had a perspective that has created my reality many times in which
Yeah.
I've been very judgmental of my ward. But I think uniformly I have been in wards that are full of people that are doing their best and that are acting the best way they know how to love everybody else in their ward. And obviously nobody's perfect, but
Yeah.
I do want to be clear that even in our current ward, we are so surrounded by people who are just full of love. And when I am in a mindset where I'm going to church, giving the benefit of the doubt, I see how Christ-like the people that surround me really are.
Yeah. And I think this is where Jody Moore's work is so empowering because, in those moments of tension where you're really struggling with a speaker or some sort of interaction at church, it really is incredible, like how it it works every time. That like you can ask yourself, what am I feeling critical of in this person, and look for that in yourself. And like I've yet to find an example where I haven't reflected exactly what I'm criticizing. Like I feel like this person is dismissing me and they're so close-minded, and I literally am like rolling my eyes like, am I being dismissive and critical? Like, yeah, like, and it doesn't mean that that person is right, but I just feel like that exercise over and over has helped me to open up to a way that I could choose connection, and like choose to reflect something more connecting, instead of meeting the pain with more pain. And so I like that's been a tool for us lately,
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
you,
I
Daniel.
like that. To basically to not let other people have power over your own spirituality, right? To not let them
Oh my
define
gosh. Yeah.
the the
Yeah.
boundaries of what you're going to experience. I mean, so
Yeah.
if you're in a sacrament meeting and you just cannot, even with the spiritual discipline of what can I learn from this person, you just can't muster that strength that day. Well, I have lots of practice of like tuning out in meetings and just like entertaining my own thoughts. I have no doubt that
Yeah.
many listeners are doing that this moment as I'm speaking. Um, and so like there is a way
Mm.
that even if you're there, like you can find a way to commune with God, even in that moment, right? If you're in
Yes.
Relief Society class and you just like can't do it, well, you can always like pull out your phone and read the scriptures, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there are ways to do this without sort of divorcing yourself from the community or sort of standing in judgment of our fellow saints.
Do you have any other practical steps, maybe other than those things that you can do while you're at church? But say somebody's listening to this and saying, "I want to have that perspective. Like I want to look at these people charitably, but I'm just not feeling it. When I go into church, what I'm feeling is is resentment and or anger, and potentially then when I feel those things, I know I shouldn't be feeling them, so now I feel guilty or I feel ashamed of myself." Do you have practical steps that people can sort of just like start, I don't know, applying maybe day to day to start to work toward a place where where they're feeling more, I guess, harmony, toward their fellow community members?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure that I have the kind of silver bullet or magic wand. I do think I really believe in the promise that Moroni makes us when he tells us to pray for charity. Like and what that means is, for me at least, and because I've practiced this and I've seen it be real, I don't think it's something magical that just like you pray for it and then God and then it like descends on you, some kind of like vending machine thing. I think the act of praying for charity, and this can't even be proactive, like before you go to church on Sunday, right? To what that does, I think what that prayer does, especially if it's a regular part of your prayer life, a regular part of your kind of contemplative practice, is it's already putting you in the mindset of saying, how am I going to orient myself with generosity towards other people? So it's not waiting for God to change it all, magically, or to change other people. Even it's sort of reorienting yourself in relationship to the situation. It takes and it's hard, and again, some days it just doesn't work,
Yeah.
but it's a fundamental reorientation, I think, towards the members of our community. And and then part of it too. I sort of learned this lesson a long time ago from my dad, who said, I think I was probably a teenager when he talked about this. He said, "I don't go to church to learn anything." At
Mm.
this point, he says, if I learn something, great, fantastic. That's like cherry on top. But he says, I'm there first and foremost to worship God. I'm there to take the sacrament. I'm there to reflect on Jesus's atoning work for me, and God's love for me, and then to reflect that back to others however I can.
Wow.
And so church gives me a structured opportunity where I can, in this space, where I can be there for somebody else. And that's, again, that's hard to do sometimes, especially, uh, other people sometimes control the classroom or control the pulpit and things like that. But I think when we go to church with that kind of attitude, that we're here for love of God and then love of other people, the vertical and the horizontal, I think it sort of changes our attitude.
I love that. And then it was so powerful. There are definitely eras of my life where I was going to church with really sensitive ears, and I'm just like listening for those like red flag words that will like cue me that somebody is either with me or against me. And like when that's the experience, like that's exactly what you get. Like you're going to leave feeling like you know who your friends are and you feel divided from everybody else. And I think if charity is your prayer, then it sort of changes the way you hear everything. Like you're hearing things that make you feel connected. Like you're hearing pain and you're hearing things that resonate. And instead of like sorting people, you're able to really just feel love. And
Yeah.
and then it just doesn't seem like it matters quite as much.
Yeah.
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 Okay, beautiful.
Right.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Are any final thoughts you want to leave us with before we sign off, just given the context of this
Maybe
discussion?
the one thing when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, it occurred to me that most of life is boring. Like the vast majority of life is boring, and a lot of life is a letdown. And I was thinking about this actually, a couple different kind of analogies or metaphors. So one, like from the sports world, like I love sports, and like, you know, like when you're watching like an amazing playoff game where like so much is at stake and like there's like so much emotion. It's incredible. And then like to go to like a regular season game, like, if you're baseball, like one of 162 games, who cares what's going on? Even the players don't really care that much, right? So there's some of that. I also remembered I once, like, the best meal of my life. Some friends took Melissa and I to this restaurant. Incredible. It's run by Jose Andres, the world famous chef, and
Wow.
it was like when we got there, the waiter was like, do you want to order off the menu, or would you like the chef to take you on a journey? We're like, journey, please.
I'll take the journey.
The journey. So like it was literally the most incredible culinary experience of my life. Like,
Wow.
and then we went home, went to bed, and the next morning we opened the cupboard and there's like cereal. Right? It's that's what life is. That's exactly what life is. And so I had an incredible weekend at Restore, right? It was amazing. But think about like how much energy and effort went into that, right? You can't do that. Faith Matters can't do that every weekend, right? I mean, that's just not the way.
Remains to be seen if we can do it every year.
Right, exactly. You guys are probably so exhausted, right? But I remember you mentioned Eugene England earlier, and it's great. Why the church is as true as the gospel. I always remember this one line from it where he says he opens it with this example of he was a kid, he was at a state conference, he wasn't even paying attention, he was like teasing his sister, and then I think it was Harold B. Lee was talking, like he was not even listening, but then like something happened, and like the spirit just like hit him like a ton of bricks, and he says, how many boring state conferences would I attend to be even once in the presence of such grace?
Wow.
Right. And so like life is boring. Life is tedious. Life is mundane. Anybody who's a parent knows this. Anybody who has a job knows this. Anybody who's a church member knows this. And so, so part of, I think, mortality, part of this experience of just being human is like one foot in front of the other, going through all of that. There will be transformational moments occasionally, right? There will be these just transcendent occurrences, but they're really rare. And part of what life is just like showing up as a parent, showing up as an employee, as a church member, to be in a place where you can be struck by this incredible moment of grace every once in a while. And then that gets you through the next morning of breakfast cereal.
Love it. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Yeah,
really,
thank you.
I think it's really, really going to be helpful. Okay, thanks so much for listening, and we really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Patrick Mason. And a huge thanks to Patrick again for coming back on. And if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get a chance, we'd love for you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. It really helps get the word out about Faith Matters, and we really appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening, and as always, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.